Coming up on our newscast, Ambassador Mark Lippert is released from the hospital. He thanks the Korean public for their support while he underwent surgery after last week's knife attack, and also reiterated that bilateral ties between Korea and the U.S. will only grow stronger after that ordeal. And according to the Finance Ministry's monthly economic assessment, the Korean economy is facing sluggish domestic demand despite low inflation. In the tech realm, the highly anticipated Apple Watch is unveiled. The latest technological marvel can be strapped to your wrist for as low as $349. Stay with us for these stories and much more. It's good to have you with us. This is Early Edition at 6, live from Seoul. I'm Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Thanks for tuning in. We begin with the latest on the injured U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Mark Lippert. He was discharged from hospital earlier in the afternoon.
Yes, before leaving, he told reporters in partially fluent Korean that the Seoul-Washington alliance remains firm. Our Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
Scarred but with a huge smile on his face, Ambassador Lippert thanked the South Korean public for their support following last week's brutal knife attack. Speaking to reporters before leaving the hospital on Tuesday, the U.S. envoy said in Korean that the incident will only strengthen ties between Seoul and Washington.
Beyond 돼 땅이 굳어진다.
Ambassador Lippert, who was attacked by a man wielding a knife at a breakfast meeting in central Seoul last week, needed 80 stitches on his right cheek and left arm. The stitches on his face have been removed, but doctors will be visiting his home every day to check on his arm until he is fully recovered. All things considered, the envoy says he feels pretty darn good.
I mean, it was obviously a scary incident, but I'm walking, talking, holding my baby, hugging my wife. So I just feel really good.
But he did hint at a possible change in the security procedures, as many blamed lax security for his injuries. At the time of the attack, the ambassador only had one full-time South Korean bodyguard with him.
But obviously, as people and the State Department in Washington have said, we're going to take a hard look at our techniques, procedures here, and I'll leave it to the security experts to come up with recommendations and policies going forward.
The ambassador, with a mix of Korean words, asked the South Korean public to treat him as they had done before the incident, as the guy next door and Sejun's dad.
I will still be a 동네 아저씨 and Sejuni Appa, as people here in Korea have called me.
Despite the appalling incident, Ambassador Lippert said that he wants to return to the job as soon as possible to advance the alliance between their two countries, adding that there will be no changes to their economic, political, and military cooperation. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
A top UN official on North Korea human rights has called for more concerted international efforts to raise awareness about Pyongyang's crimes against humanity. He says North Korea's past abduction of foreign nationals should be addressed. Arirang's Connie Kim has more.
A senior human rights investigator at the United Nations is calling for concerted international pressure to get North Korea to address its kidnapping of hundreds of foreign nationals. In a report released on Monday, Marzuki Darusman, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in North Korea, said countries should come together to bring back surviving abductees and shed light on all abduction cases. The strategy laid out in the report calls for efforts to refer the North Korean leadership to the International Criminal Court and a global approach to improve North Korea's dire human rights situation, with the goal of bringing a close to all enforced disappearances by Pyongyang. North Korea's systematic abductions of foreign nationals gained the spotlight with the publication of a UN Commission of Inquiry report last year that said Pyongyang had engaged in abduction as a matter of state policy. The report says North Korean agents have abducted hundreds of foreign nationals, mainly from South Korea, Japan, and China since the 1960s. Adding to the urgency, Darusman said Japanese authorities are investigating 881 possible abduction cases believed to have been carried out by Pyongyang. Japanese authorities have already identified 12 other abductees. Darusman's report will be presented to the Human Rights Council in Geneva next week. Last week, North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young, speaking at a UN Human Rights Council meeting, flatly rejected the landmark UN report released last year, calling it politically motivated. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Joel Witt, a world-renowned nuclear scientist, had said last month that North Korea could expand its nuclear arms tenfold to around 100 weapons by the year 2020. Well, another nuclear expert has dismissed that report, saying it is technically impossible for the North. Speaking to the Voice of America, a former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Laah Hyun-kyung, said there is a difference between having the nuclear material for weapons and making the weapons. He added that it would be reasonable to assume that Pyongyang can produce 3 or 4 weapons a year. Amid speculation that the U.S. might deploy its missile defense system, also known as THAAD, to South Korea to counter North Korean threats, China is reportedly aiming to block that deployment. The Washington Free Beacon reports that Chinese President Xi Jinping has tried to persuade President Park Geun-hye not to accept Washington's moves. Citing current and former U.S. officials, the report suggests that Beijing will provide more intimate trade and business chances if Seoul knocks the U.S. back. South Korea's defense ministry reaffirmed on Monday that the U.S. has made no such request. Seoul says it's working on its own missile defense system that should be ready by 2020. Now, South Korea is planning to impose some kind of sanctions on the companies that comply with North Korea's recent unilateral wage hike at the Inter-Korean factory complex in Kaesong. Seoul's Unification Ministry official told reporters on Tuesday that the government plans to outline the possible legal and administrative steps the firms could face if they give out raised wage payments in March. This follows Pyongyang's decision to up the monthly wage of the North Korean workers at the complex by 5% to $74. Seoul has called for talks on the matter, but the call has so far gone unanswered by the North.
Kim Young-ran, the woman who first pushed for the recently passed anti-corruption bill, says she doesn't think it's unconstitutional to include private school teachers and members of the media as subjects in that bill. At a press conference, the former chair of the Anticorruption and Civil Rights Commission said a survey has found nearly 70% of Koreans think adding the two groups was advisable. While stressing that the bill does not violate the right to equality, Kim added there's a need for measures to protect the freedom of the press. The bill, named after Kim, states that public servants, members of the media, and private school and kindergarten teachers will face criminal punishment if they or their spouses are found to have accepted $890 or more worth of money or gifts or special treatment from a person unrelated to their work.
Face a one-day entry ban.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News. Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Korea's finance ministry says the country's recovery momentum is not strong enough, pointing to a need for more stimulus measures. With the government pledging to pour money into the economy in the first half of this year, all eyes are on whether the central bank will cut its key rate this week. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea's major economic indicators were all down this year. Output, consumption, and exports all plunged, while consumer prices would also have marked a drop if it were not for a tobacco price hike. The finance ministry is expressing concerns, saying the country's recovery momentum is still weak. It adds that lingering uncertainties abroad, like a weak Japanese yen and a possible rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve, also pose a threat to the domestic economy. To prop up growth, the government has announced a $9 billion stimulus package for the first half of this year and called on the corporate sector to raise their wage levels, which will in turn boost domestic demand. Given the efforts made by the government, market expectations are mounting for the central bank to cut its key rate in the coming months.
There's a high possibility that the Bank of Korea will cut the rate in April as it revises down its growth outlook for the Korean economy.
The Bank of Korea will set its key rate for this month on Thursday. Attention is now focused on the central bank's next move, as the prospect of another rate cut also prompts concerns about the country's snowballing household debt. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Members of Korea's older generation are becoming more hesitant to spend money these days as they prepare for their lives after retirement. Statistics Korea says the average tendency to consume among households led by people in their 60s tumbled by 11.5 percentage points between 2003 and 2014. That age group was spending the most in 2003. The second biggest drop was experienced by those in their 50s, with a decline of 5.7 percentage points. The index measures the proportion of money people use from their disposable income. Over in Europe, Greece is set to hold technical talks with its creditors in Brussels on Wednesday on its €240 billion bailout program. Eurozone finance ministers are treating the matter with urgency as Greece runs out of cash. Shin Se-min reports.
European finance ministers are impatient, saying there is no time to lose. The troubled Greece is quickly running out of funds and must repay its IMF loan installment by the end of the month. Europe's finance ministers have criticized Greece for wasting time. Chairing a meeting with Eurozone finance ministers on Monday, Dutch Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem said technical talks on further funding for Greece would start on Wednesday. The Eurogroup chairman says Eurozone member nations are ready to support Greece if it continues on the economic reform path.
The talks have to start rather today than tomorrow, and we shouldn't waste so much time. The extension is only for 4 months, and the time is ticking away.
The Eurozone agreed last month to extend Greece's bailout program until June, and it is hoping to approve a detailed list of reforms by next month. So far, Athens has only outlined its proposals in broad terms, describing 7 reforms it wants to launch. The proposal will be soon discussed with the 3 institutions dubbed the Troika: the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF. In the meantime, the ECB began its €1 trillion quantitative easing program on Monday as Europe's national central banks began picking up the debts of their own governments. The euro fell to its lowest level against the US dollar in 11.5 years on Monday, ending at $1.08.5, spurring talks of euro-dollar parity. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, on a visit to Japan, urged the country to address its wartime past and reiterated the importance of reconciliation with neighboring countries. This as Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe faces mounting pressure from the international community for a wartime apology. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
During the second day of her 2-day visit to Japan, German Chancellor Angela Merkel reportedly advised Japan to properly address the issue of the forced sexual enslavement of Asian women during World War II. Japan-based Kyodo News reports that Merkel emphasized the importance of reconciliation between Japan and Korea during her meeting with the leader of Japan's opposition Democratic Party, Kazuya Okada. Merkel added that it's important to face the problems of the past in response to Okada's concerns about a lack of reconciliation with Japan's neighboring countries, mainly Korea and China. A day before, she had urged Japan to face its wartime atrocities, referring to Germany's reconciliatory efforts after World War II. Merkel's latest remarks have been seen as a call for change in the lukewarm attitude currently taken by the administration of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe toward acknowledging Japan's wartime atrocities. And she's not the only one pressuring Japan to offer an apology. Korea's foreign ministry spokesperson Do Gang-il said on Tuesday that the country expects Japan to build trust with its neighbors by making courageous efforts to face up to its history, just as Germany did after World War II. Also, U.S. Representative Mike Honda has said that Abe should not be allowed to appear before the U.S. Congress without repenting for the country's wartime history. In February, Abe had conveyed his wish to address Congress, and if he does, he will become the first Japanese prime minister to do so. Prime Minister Abe is set to issue a statement in August to mark the 70th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II, but there's speculation that he'll try to water down Japan's wartime atrocities. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Upon Merkel's arrival in Tokyo on Monday, a German newspaper slammed Japan for trying to whitewash its past aggressions in Asia. The center's daily Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung said Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's attempts to water down Tokyo's past apologies are stifling Japan's economic recovery as they are blocking trade to the world's largest export market, China. It also noted that the Abe administration's behavior serves to bring Korea and China closer together. Meanwhile, Arab nations may band together to create a coalition to fight Islamic State militants in the region. The Islamic State group, meanwhile, is reportedly undergoing internal discord amid its rapid expansion. Our Park Ji-won has more on this development.
The Arab League urged its member countries to create a unified air force to counter the growing threats from extremists in the region, including the Islamic State group. The remarks came during a two-day Arab League foreign ministers meeting that started Monday in Cairo.
There is an urgent need for the creation of a multi-purpose common Arab military force able to intervene rapidly to fight terrorism and the activities of terrorist groups.
The creation of the force will top the agenda of the Arab League's two-day annual summit set to take place in Egypt later this month from the 28th to the 29th. In the absence of a unified force, several Arab League countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan, have participated in U.S.-led airstrikes against Islamic State in Syria. Egypt also carried out its own airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Libya after the militant group beheaded 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians last month. Meanwhile, the Islamic State group is reportedly undergoing internal strife and maintaining its unity and ideology amid its rapid expansion. The Wall Street Journal reported, citing interviews with Islamic State defectors, that resentments are piling up among both the Syrian and foreign fighters inside the notorious extremist group, and the number of defections has increased in recent months. Local members are discontent with the higher salaries and lodging given to foreign fighters, while some foreign fighters voiced opposition to the brutal treatment of civilians, prisoners, and members. Dozens of foreign members who refused to fight or who were caught fleeing from battlefields have been reportedly been executed over the past few months. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
In other stories, scientists say a jawbone fossil discovered by a graduate student in Ethiopia could belong to an early species that led to modern humans in the evolutionary process. Our Kim Yeon-bin has the details.
A 2.8 million year old jawbone fossil with 5 teeth intact has been unearthed in an Ethiopian desert. The discovery is evidence that early humans roamed the earth 500,000 years before what was previously thought. Scientists say the fossil represents the oldest known specimen of the human genus Homo and appears to be in the earlier stages of the human lineage.
And it's important because it is transitional between Australopithecus species, it has some of those characteristics, and of later Homo species. And so we can follow evolution more closely because of it.
The jawbone was found near the location of where the remains of one of the most famous human ancestor fossils, Lucy, was found.
And so we can see how evolution works by having some of the older characteristics of Lucy's species plus the new characteristics of the Homo species in this mandible.
The autonomy of this discovery is seen to have a close relationship with later Homo species, as it encompasses the left side of the jaw. It has features including tooth shape and jaw proportions that separates the Homo lineage species from the more ape-like Australopithecus. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News.
Now for some culture and arts news. Korean classical music known as kugak has a history that dates back over 1,000 years. The natural sound of kugak is prized, but there's a secret behind how that sound is achieved in today's modern theaters. Our Im Yoon-hee has this story.
Kugak stems from a long, rich history and has maintained Korea's cultural heritage through time. There are various genres of music within kugak, linked together by the use of traditional Korean instruments. There are no microphones on this stage or speakers to project the sounds, yet every plek of the kayagum and boom of the puk is crisp and clear to the audience members who are listening.
They don't use a mic, but you can still hear the individual sounds of each instrument, which is really special.
The set pieces on a kugak stage are typically centered, and there's a traditional folding screen placed center stage to amplify the sounds of the instruments. The material of the folding screen plays a role as well, preventing any unwanted sounds from reaching the audience. Meanwhile, the instruments used in kugak have a significantly shorter reverberation time of only 1.2 seconds at most, as compared to classical instruments with much longer reverberation times. To compensate, the stage is designed and arranged to create the ideal setting for the instruments.
With kugak instruments, the reverberations are short, so if it's played in a hall made for long reverberations, the sounds are dulled and jumbled. Instruments with reverberations that are shorter than classical instruments need a different setting for the optimal sound.
The National Kugak Center holds regular performances to preserve Korea's traditions and lead the music of kugak into the future. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
Well, it still feels like yesterday when the late Steve Jobs reached into his watch pocket and pulled out the tiny, tiny iPod.
Yes, and people are very excited for that.
Right, and people are more excited because in San Francisco, Apple unveiled its latest wearable gadget, the Apple Watch, finally.
That's right. It comes in 3 different models, and the price starts at $349 US, but it goes all the way up to $17,000 for the gold, luxury gold edition. Kim Young-gil has more.
It's been 5 years since Apple launched the iPad, and now the company is making a major play for the wearables market with its Apple Watch. The watch comes in 3 different models: the Apple Watch, the Apple Watch Sport, and the high-end Apple Watch Edition. The watch has many integrated features such as the Apple Pay mobile wallet, messaging, calls, health tracking applications, and the ability to connect your watch to a friend's watch. Pre-orders for the watch start April 10th and it will go on sale on April 24th. It will first be available in the US, Australia, China, and Japan, among other countries.
The Apple Watch is the most advanced timepiece ever created.
Apple enters a market already crowded by major tech companies, ranging from Korea's Samsung and LG to China's Huawei and startups such as Pebble. And with the smartwatch market expected to take off this year with projected sales of 28 million units from last year's 4.6 million, mobile manufacturers are pouring their efforts into making their smartwatches better and more visually appealing. Samsung, which had attempted to steal Apple's thunder with the release of its Galaxy Gear in 2013, is planning to release a new smartwatch during the first half of the year. LG surprised many with its Urbane smartwatch, which has the ability to make and receive phone calls without the need for a connected smartphone. Apple requires a connection to an iPhone to be fully operational. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now the weather. It's been 8 years since the last cold wave advisory was issued in March here in Korea.
And it feels much colder out there with the wind. Let's turn to our Michelle Park to see when things will warm up. Michelle, fill us in, please.
Good evening, guys. The cold wave alert has been lifted now, but since the cold air is still with us, these conditions are expected to last until Thursday morning. And also be sure to watch out for those huge gaps in temperatures between the mornings and nights. But we still have a dry weather alert across the nation, along with the wind alert in coastal regions. Now, the skies are also looking relatively clear, but the clouds are expected to move in as we proceed into the night, and there is chance of rain in Chungcheongnam-do province as well. Now, tomorrow temperatures are expected to be below the seasonal averages again, but it will be milder with readings about 3 to 4 degrees higher than today. Now, there will be also some precipitation on Gangwon-do province. Now, let's have a look at the readings for tomorrow. Seoul will start off the Wednesday morning at -4 and gets up high to 6 degrees in the afternoon, while Daegu and Busan will hit both at 11 degrees. Moving over to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 8, Dokdo hits down to 3, while Mount Kumgang is lower at -7 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a wrap from us at this hour. Have a great evening if you are in Korea. This has been Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.